Hi there, Corinne Wilhelm here from the Clever Together podcast, which is brought to you by Bite Sized English. Hi, today I'm going to try a different approach to make it a little bit easier for you to understand and follow the podcast. So, a lot of my students say that it would be easier, or they always find it easier, to listen to something if they can read at the same time. So, I'm considering doing this once a month. So if you're interested in me doing this once a month, then let me know and we'll see how you get on. So as soon as I click this button here, we should be ready to go, and you will be hearing the podcast, but you will also be seeing on the screen where we are in the dialogue. Okay, so I'm not using a microphone because otherwise I cannot record the screen and my own voice. So please forgive me if the audio quality isn't quite what it should be.
That's where it's a good idea in English.
Whoops. Let's start at the beginning, shall we?
Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Clever Together. And today I wanted to talk to you about consistency in communication. That in the UK, where we spent the summer holidays, we always go camping. And in this particular camping site, they made a big deal about communicating how much water they were saving by collecting it on the roofs and using it again, or recycling the water for the showers. Great initiative, right? Well, this was a great camping site, but I did notice that there was a tap dripping. Now, this is an example of inconsistency in communication because the tap didn't say anything, but it was dripping, and it was telling the people looking at this tap, maybe water isn't so important after all. Do you see what I mean? Even your actions portray your communication. So it's really important in communication to be consistent. So you don't have to say the same thing over and over and over again like you see in advertising. But it is important to stay true to your message, true to your brand, and true to your values. If you want to repeat yourself, then that can feel a little bit awkward if you are giving instructions. So, of course, you can use different words. The tendency is for people just to repeat exactly the same words, maybe a bit louder, which can make a really condescending impression on the person listening. Now, the person listening to you might just not have heard you. There might have been a lorry going past. There might be something going through his brain that took him off track just for a few seconds. You might have caught somebody when they're just in the middle of something else, or they're thinking about something else that they have to do. We're busy people. So it might just be a case that they really didn't hear you, in which case repeating yourself word for word would be fine. But if they heard you, but they didn't understand you, so then it's a good idea to use different words. That's where it's a good idea in English to have a few different verbs up your sleeve, different words to explain the same thing. You can use descriptions, but you can also use diagrams, illustrations, memes, infographics. And don't forget the value of examples. Give people an example and they invariably get it. So think about your complex message and see if you can put it on the back of a fag packet, as we say in the UK. So if you can put your whole concept onto the back of a fag packet or a post-it note, then you're well on the way to be able to describe that concept to anybody else. The very process of describing how something works draws your attention to any inconsistencies, because that's when you stop and think about things. How do we do it? Well, so-and-so does it like this. I do it like that. Inconsistency. You see, so it's actually a really valuable exercise in terms of consistency of how you do things, but also how you communicate things to tell somebody else how it works. Hand gestures as well might feel a bit ridiculous, but are really helpful. Now, anybody who has gone to live in another country and has felt really desperate, and you start communicating, but the words aren't there, it's very natural to use your hands. There's nothing else you can do. It's automatic. But in your own language, or maybe in a business situation, that might feel kind of awkward. But you know what? For the person listening, or in this case, watching, it can be really, really helpful. So don't feel shy about using your hands, showing, distances, or, what comes first, what comes next, marking your conversation with pointers using your hands, because it's this visual element that can help you make your message so much more effectively than if you just rely on words. You know how in advertising they use the same advert time and time again to get the message home? Well, that's how it works in advertising. It will be exactly the same advertisement on the television, in the newspapers. If you read a magazine, you'll see the same brands using the magazine time and time again. Firstly, they will have bought a series of advertisements, but also because the people advertising in that particular magazine are targeting that particular type of audience. So you might well see exactly the same type of advertisement, maybe a different product, but you will recognize a kind of common thread going through all of those advertisements. But quite often they will use different advertisements, maybe different products, whether it's a car manufacturer or a makeup manufacturer, it doesn't matter. They probably will promote a series of different products from their range. But think about how they do that. Very often you will be sure to see the same branding, the same colors, the same text, and all of this imagery that reminds you of their brand will be very firmly anchored in these big companies' corporate guidelines or branding guidelines. Now, when I worked at PricewaterhouseCoopers, they were very, very strict about corporate guidelines. And at the time, I was in marketing, so I got it. But I was working with consultants, and, these guys thought that this was really, forgive the phrase, anal, over the top. Okay. So, but I used to get it, and I used to spend my life explaining why it was important. But it wasn't really until I had my own business that I realized how that might seem to somebody who is actually having to create that material and make sure that everything is in line. But having to get it to fit and getting the logo in the corner and the right dimensions, then where do you put the text? And, it can get a bit faffy, but it really is worth doing this, because every message you put out there is adding on to the image that somebody has in their heads of your organization. So whether it's an employee looking to work for you, or whether it's an apprentice going to do their training for you, or of course a client or even a supplier, they're all listening very intensely, watching very intensely to see, because first impressions are very, very strong, very important. But if somebody has stayed with you for that long, if they're over that first impression, then they want that impression compounded, because it's consistency that is the key to achieving trust. Because if people can see that you mean what you say, that you stand behind what you are saying, that your communication matches up with your actions, then they can rely on you, they can depend on you, and they feel more comfortable handing over their money to you and their time. It's not just about money, is it? So they want to be able to have that security. And if you are to give people this confidence in your brand, then consistency is the key. Trust is pivotal If people are going to trust you, give you money, give their time, give their resources, lend their staff, whatever it is, they need to trust you. And they need to see that you are consistent in your message, in what you do, in what you say. So consistency can seem like one of those, okay. But actually, do you see how important it is? It shouts out that you are trustworthy, that you are reliable, that you can be depended upon. And we are creatures of habit, right? So if my image of a company is building and I'm getting closer to it and it's feeling right for me and I'm getting to trust them, and then suddenly they do something that is not in line with my image of that company, then I get thrown off track. And it doesn't matter how flexible you are as an individual, if your image of an organization is suddenly questioned or pushed into another place in your positioning for that company, for that organization, then you lose ground. So corporate values can also be represented through consistency. If your organization is trying to do something for the society, give something back, be engaged in the community, then quite often you'll be asked to get involved in community projects, whether it's running a marathon or helping a kindergarten replan their garden. That task, that action should represent something that is meaningful for your organization as well as theirs. So there should be a consistency, a balance, a fit between what you are doing to help the society and the community at large, which is always great, but you should choose very carefully what you do so that it represents your own organization's values, principles, and maybe goals and mission. Let's think about this in your own situation for a moment. Think about your family. Maybe some of you had older brothers and sisters. And the older brothers and sisters said, that's not fair. We had to do this, this, and this. We had to go to bed by then. We weren't allowed to do that. Likewise, if you're the youngest child, you might well have got away with murder that the older kids didn't get away with. This is a typical example of communication consistency breaking down. Now, of course, this is a development. Your parents will have been developing. They will have been learning all the time. And they might have noticed that if they cut their children a bit of slack, then they tend to take responsibility themselves. But it could also be that they're just older and they just don't have the energy. But either way, sometimes your communication style will have to adapt, and that might be interpreted or misinterpreted as inconsistency. So you just have to be aware of that. And it's the same in an organization. You have to be very careful of being mindful of diversity, whether gender, race, abilities, handicaps, whatever it is. It's really important to make sure that your communication is a reflection of your values. And likewise, your communication will very often reflect your inner beliefs. And so it's very important to be careful about how you communicate and to try and be consistent. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of saying, the female person in the room, do you mind making some coffee? Or do you mind calling us a cab? But there might well be somebody in the room who is a male who is equally able to get on the phone and order a cab. So you have to be very consistent in your communication to be seen to be fair, to be seen to be in touch with the people that you're working with. So let's think about another situation. So say, for example, you're on a team, and that's all about give and take too, isn't it? There has to be consistency. And if you're putting a team together, there needs to be consistency in communication, the way that you speak to people in that team, the way that you communicate what is expected of them, the way that you give them feedback, and the way that you encourage them to help you, to support you, to do something for you. In terms of consistency policies, it can come across as, if you think about franchises or turnkey, if you like. I'm reading a book about that at the moment. I will put notes in the show notes. If you're trying to gear up your business to sell it and, pass it on, you can only do that if you've got really, really regular income, if you've got systems in place that are a no-brainer to carry on. So it doesn't pay to be the hero if you want to create something bigger. And while some people might say, yes, but I don't want to have to tell my staff exactly what they have to do every minute of the day. Yeah, well, I'm not saying you have to take away somebody's style. I'm not saying you have to take away their personality, but by giving them a framework, you can enable them to reach out in a way that is consistent. So if every customer coming into a hotel, for example, goes through exactly the same procedure every time, then you have a much better opportunity of providing the hotel visitor with a good experience. And that is what is likely to either bring them back if they're a business traveler or recommend it to their friends. So recommendations, word of mouth, are gold dust, right? And the key to that gold dust is by producing a consistent experience each time. So by communicating what it is that you want to convey in a consistent way, you have a much better chance of reaching customer loyalty. So it's not about killing people's personality. It's about giving them a framework in which they can excel. And then once the framework is in place, then it's easier to be yourself because it's a preconditioned process. So that's it. That's my talk about consistency today. It all started with a tap in the UK in a camping site, and this is where it led me. So isn't it funny how little situations in life can get you thinking about different factors that are affecting you in your business or your work? And remember that consistency could be something like always doing something in a certain way, always shaking hands and then suddenly you don't, always saying at the end of an email, kind regards, and then suddenly you just say regards. That could be misconceived as, a break in faith or a break in the relationship somehow, but it might just have been a lack of attention to detail. So do you see how consistency in communication can really be the little details, the little things? And it's an accumulation of these little things that make a difference. So why don't you try it out? This week, take one element of your work or business and write it down. Are you aware, as a result of doing it, of any inconsistencies? Is there something that you would like to make more consistent? Or do you feel that sometimes your communication can be inconsistent? I know that in my case, my communication can become inconsistent with my son, for example, who helps me with this podcast, if I'm tired or stressed or in a hurry. So what can I do to take me one step back to stop me getting tired, stressed? Sometimes I speak too fast. I'm not consistent about the way that I explain. Sometimes I fall into German for too long when I'm teaching English because I like to be crystal clear about grammar. But I need to be consistent about getting back into English as soon as I can. So what did you discover when you tried this out? I'd love to hear from you in the Facebook group. So take care, have a wonderful day, and I hope to speak to you very soon. If you want to have the vocabulary, then just sign up for my newsletter, and that will be going out tomorrow. Take care now. Corinne Wilhelm from Clever Together, which is sponsored by Bite Sized English. Goodbye.